All right, welcome back, everyone, after a very, 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 very long hiatus to the next discussion, which is going to be covering what actually happened in the Corona Theatre and what happened in Borealia as a whole. We're going to be looking at sort of what is Borealia and Corona, what the context was for this happening, and then go over the whole sort of main overtures of what happened during this whole writing an RP session, and then we're going to kind of go over a bit about what it's like now, and then take questions at the end. So the first thing is obviously what is Corona or Borealia? Well, the Third Republic of Corona was once the largest nation in the Ancerious Galaxy. It was a native, and it was located just above the Galactic North in the sort of vertically into the galactic disk, yeah? They were a powerhouse of a nation because they controlled mostly the Ancerian markets. They had the largest mining fleets, they had absolutely insane amounts of territory, massive population, and they had quite a lot of influence. Now, the thing to note about Coronans is that they are a degenerate species. They are a degenerate species of humanity, even. So, if you think that what pugs are to dogs, Coronans are to humans. Therefore, they're not particularly intelligent and they're not particularly capable. But they have enough in place to sort of cement their supremacy. At least that was until the beginning of the Third Ancerios War. A series of events led to the collapse of the Third Republic of Corona, and that's what caused all the events that we're going to be going into. Now, those events are a combination of different things. The first thing that happened was something called the Jobadiah Report came out. And that was a particular sort of report done by a guy called Jobadiah, spoilers I know, that was effectively meant to give an overview of what the galactic economy was going to be like in the next 10 years or so. It was supposed to give a bit of a projection on what was going to happen. And the Jobadiah report effectively said, there's going to be war. There's going to be galactic war very, very soon in the future, and it's going to completely destroy the economy because everyone's going to realise that all of their investments, all of their money that's tied up in all these assets are actually worth nothing because it's all just speculation. And everyone was like, that's pretty crazy because it got leaked. It wasn't actually supposed to be released to the entire galaxy, but it got leaked. And everyone thought, I wonder if my assets are worth anything. And the entire galactic economy kind of turned around, looked at itself and went, oh shit, we built this on pillars of salt. And immediately everyone started selling everything off. And it was this massive race to the bottom. And Ancerium prices went from kind of, normal to negatives. People were trying to give Ancerium away. It was worthless. Absolutely worthless. And so all of these major nations that had built themselves up on coloronic trade through Ancerium and coloronic materials basically had their economies completely implode overnight. And the biggest one being the Third Republic of Corona, who controlled AMEC. It's kind of like the Ancerium version of OPEC. Big organization designed to harvest Ancerium on a massive scale. So the Third Republic of Corona found itself with no economy overnight. And when you control almost 900 star systems and you've got all this stuff to do, you kind of need an economy. And so Corona actually did something smart. They went to the Kriz Pact. And the Kriz Pact are kind of like the EU in the Ancerios universe. They are the oldest natives that are the most developed. So they're kind of like those who made contact with the colonials really, really, really early on. And because of that, they developed really, really quickly. They industrialized, they built up their economies, built up their industry, built up their capabilities, and became these kind of influential native powers. And Corona went to the Kriz Pact and said, okay, Ancerium is at an all-time low. We will give you a deal, a contract. You continue to buy Ancerium for us at a fixed rate that's higher than the current prices, but way lower than what was the galactic standard. because everyone thought that the economy was going to slowly recover and prices were going to kind of steadily go up. So in this regard, Corona at least could still sustain itself and keep its economy going. Yeah, sure, it's at a bit of a lower price, but everyone's going to be okay and get what they want. And then Yogg-Nar, Eclipse Lord of Palm-Merdif and this, living biological terror weapon that's the size of a planet, decided to FTL jump into the biggest mining fleet in the galaxy, waiting outside of the Zarathustra Ancerium star. Now, the mining fleet and the galaxy had expected this Ancerium star that was very, very close to leaving the Golden Expanse's interdiction zone to leave within the next few years. And so all the Ancerium that was in this star had been taken into account by the markets. It was going to be used for X, Y, and Z. There was going to be this amount of mining over so many years. Everything was tallied up. And then Yogg-Nar turned up and blew up the whole mining fleet and then went and started consuming Zarathustra. So not only did all of the stuff that was taken into account for the market disappear overnight, but the mining fleets that actually were used to mine Ancerium got blown to pieces. And the Golden Corridor, which is the main entrance to, the main mining areas of the galaxy, was threatened. So Ancerium prices went from pennies to suddenly absolutely like gold dust. The price jumped to ludicrous amounts just in an instant, okay? And suddenly, the Third Republic of Corona found itself going, oh shit, we're selling, the most valuable resource in the galaxy for pennies. And they went to the Chris Pact and they were like, well, we need to renegotiate our deal. And the Chris Pact went, good joke. We're not renegotiating with you. And Corona's economy collapsed. Because suddenly, they're making no money. And so the Third Republic of Corona was left with one choice. And that was to secure the Adelshaven Corridor, the Golden Corridor, where all the Ancerium flows through. So they assembled a absolutely titanic fleet and they marched on Adelshaven. And that was where the two sides of Saga and Kona, who were the two ideological sides of the Third Ancerios War, chose to make their stand, and there was a massive three-way battle there, yeah? Corona was defeated. Their massive fleet was shattered, and all of their forces were defeated. At that point, they got nothing left. They've got no economy, they got no military, they had nothing. And so the Third Republic collapsed. It split into warlords, different factions, hundreds of them. All while this was going on, the Coronan High Bailiffs, the leaders of Corona, made their own deal with a particular individual called Armin Lycos, head of the army of the Panopticon. And Armin Lycos made them a very simple deal. He would resurrect the fragment of Perseverance, which was the fragment of the Overmind that the Coronans were tied to psionically, yeah? As a species, they were tied to this intrinsically. It was like part of their soul. But over the years, the fragment had degenerated and was basically a shadow of its former self. It was this horrible, twisted thing. And Lycos said, I could use the power of the Panopticon to turn this fragment, this part of the soul of your people, into a shining new form. In return, you will give me the Third Republic of Corona. And we will make the Fourth Republic. And you will march under the army's banner. And the Cronan High Bailiff said, yeah, sure, if you can do it. And so Lycos did it. He used his immense power, the power of the Panopticon, to resurrect the fragment. And the bailiffs were so impressed that they said, there you go, Corona's yours now. Do what you wish with it. And they killed themselves. And Lycos used his power to bring the fragment fully to the fore, and in the process annihilated the main capital system of the Third Republic of Corona, or what was the Third Republic of Corona. This was the start of the creation of the army of the Synopticon Corona. And the distinctness is that those who followed this organisation were not Coronans. They would connect to this fragment if they followed the army and become human. And so all of these degenerated, individuals who were laughed at by the galaxy, who were stupid, ignorant, etc., were turned human. And so this this created absolutely massive support for the army in the region, and millions flocked to their banner. Now, while this was all going on, the main galaxy looked upwards and went, oh shit, the largest nation in the galaxy just fell apart. And so they came. All of these nations from all over the galaxy went to Corona, went to Borealia, where the Third Republic lay. For what purpose? You name it. They went there to seize territory. They went there to seize spoils, raid, establish petty empires, maybe set up FOBs, bring people into the fold of Kona or Saga for the Third Ancerious War, deprive others from gaining resources. You name it, people went there for it. And so this whole horde of factions went up into Borealia to establish themselves and to take over the region and see what they could do. This was where stuff started to really kind of spiral, as the initial race was really like a gold rush. All of these factions turned up. They started, either strong-arming local warlords, or outright taking over entirely, or negotiating with local warlords to set up FOBs, or setting up FOBs themselves in like unclaimed contested territories. And it was really like this big smash and grab at the start, and there was no real coherence. It was just all these factions trying to do what they could, take areas that were of interest to them. All the while, the army of the Synopticon Corona advanced and it kept expanding, taking over petty Coronan warlords and the like. As the success of the army of the Synopticon Corona grew, its leader, Malsh Erondel, gained more and more power in the army of the Panopticon sort of command structure. And the army at this point had mostly kept to the shadows. They hadn't really done much big stuff. It was all kind of kept on the down low, keep to the shadows, don't make anyone aware. But in Borealia, they'd chosen to make a play to try and get as much manpower and resources as they possibly could. And Arundel was at the spearhead of this, and everything was going great. The army was spreading out in all directions. Any organised resistance was swiftly crushed. They had millions of Coronans coming to them to be converted into humans and join the army and, help the expansion. And it was perfect. And because of this, Arundel got more and more power. And he started jockeying for positions of favour from Lycos himself, who at this point was starting to slip. You have the leader of the army of the Panopticon, who had immersed himself deeper and deeper and deeper into the Panopticon, and he was starting to become this kind of like almost demigod-like being. He'd created rebuilt the fragment and done all of this stuff. But the closer you get to this sort of godhood, the more you lose your humanity, and so he was starting to sort of slip a bit. It was almost like he was getting dementia, and Arundel kept pushing for a split in the army of the Synopticon. He believed that the army of the Synopticon should be split into various branches that would all be under the command of different people, because at the current point in time, everything was under the command of Lycos' kind of second in command, Xerxes Alesso. And Arundel didn't like Alesso. He wanted his own power. And in a kind of very awkward vote between some of the most powerful members of the army of the Panopticon, Arundel got his wish, and Lycos ordained that the army of the Synopticon be split into north, east, south, Lost Star, Corona, etc. And Arundel continued to ride the high. And that's how we got the Panopticon branches that we do today. Meanwhile, as the various factions were starting to at least talk to one another, I think at this point, and starting to establish kind of basic bounds, communication, and coordination in Borealia, the chaos attracted another faction, which are known as the Annihilationists. Now, the Annihilationists are a bunch made up of Merdif collaborators, and those who just believe in the Annihilationist cause, or the Holy Scorn, who sought to continue the mission of their lord, which is to, spoilers, annihilate and cause as much devastation as possible. And these individuals bought AFA back to Corona, and they reactivated AFA strains in the region. Now, AFA is a strain of virus, or a series of viruses, created by Palmerdieff during the Boreal Jihad. And they were terrible bioweapons designed to inflict maximum suffering and maximum death in their hosts. And they had a unique property in that they could be psionically controlled and manipulated to mutate in very specific ways to get round, defenses and counters. And these annihilationists started spreading this virus across Borealia. And it started infecting millions started dying, and all of the different factions involved suddenly had to try and race to create a cure, to stop the annihilationists, and to generally stop the outbreak. This came with mixed results at first, but in time local cures were made, and later on the Night Watch turned up, the galactic sort of organization that was made to stop these things and also helped stop it during the Boreal Jihad, came in to eventually cure the virus and shut down AFA in its rampage in the region. Just a bit after this as well, if I remember correctly, the Merdif forces and the Annihilationist forces were slowly hunted down by a combined effort. The virus was really, along with the Army of Synopticon, the main reasons of lots of these different factions that were there for various reasons to come together and actually start working together to overcome these threats. Various fast factions that were quick to respond started hunting down these annihilationist bands, all while Yogg-Nar, the Eclipse Lord, who had taken over Zarathustra, actually sent a very large biofleet up to Borealia to try and take command of the annihilationists and AFA and ensure that the Holy Scorn would be satiated in this region. After annihilating a massive amount of Kriz-Pact forces on the way to Borealia, the its forces were eventually destroyed by a huge coalition of ships from many different factions in Corona, in a huge space battle with several thousand ships aside. But during this time, as the virus ran rampant, there was a blockade of Borealia, and nobody could come in and out. And so the whole region was kind of cut off for a while to ensure that the AFA virus didn't spread back to the main galaxy. We then also had, during this period, several factions basically trying to explore Borealia. And, this region is one that has existed for many thousands of years, all the way back to the Overmind. And so some imagined that there would be ruins, traces, links back to that old period. And one of the ones who actually found that was the Network. And the Exalted Network managed to identify something called Biden. And that was the Borealia the Borealis Interception and Defense Engagement Network, I believe was the name of it. Which was an extremely old series of stations, small, I say inverted commas, small megastructures, and defensive emplacements dotted all around Borealia that were pointed outwards. And they were built seemingly to counter some outside threat. And nobody really knew what that was, but the Network, identifying the fact that there was something big, bad, and evil that could possibly be outside the area, reprogrammed. Got their forces in there, secured it, rebuilt it up, made sure everything was working in order, and even used the Biden Network to help identify annihilationist forces that were running from the United Coalition efforts, and then help pin them down and kill them. Again, during this time, I believe a few other factions were also digging around in what was called the Ancerious Galactic Library. And on the surface, it was junk. There was just miles and miles of junk. But they managed to dig down and eventually find the ruins of this old library. It became a bit of a battleground, if I remember correctly, between several factions. And in the end, they managed to discover some pretty important information regarding the fact that humanity's ancestors were called Yukagir. And the Yukagir, they basically got information on what they looked like. And they also got information about the fact that the Yukagir were designed to fight in a war. And that war was against a soulless enemy that came from another galaxy. And that galaxy was called Termentana. And this is where they started getting a little bit of information about the old invaders. And the threat of the old invaders. Thank you, Drac. Yeah, so the archaeologists basically dug themselves deeper to try and, find all these secrets, with the Kokirians, I believe, bombarding it after they got kicked out. And then Army of the Synopticon Corona also turned up to start bombarding as well. So, all while these archaeologists were kind of uncovering the secrets of this really old lore that was really intrinsic to the galaxy, there was a whole bloody battle going on above them, all while there was this chaotic just kaleidoscope of fighting. And so the galaxy then, through this, learned about the Yukagir, the fact that they were produced to fight the old invaders, and Termentana, this sister galaxy of Ancerios that nobody had really known of before, and that the old invaders had come from there. We then also had, during this period, Novi exploring a huge megastructure about the size of a star called the Onion of Worlds. That was a trash world, just made up of trash, the size of a star, that would eventually lead to the discovery of the Battle Arcs and Anwin, but we'll get onto that in a bit. Excuse me while I have a quick drink. During this period, there was much more of a concerted effort to check the AOTSK advance. They had been expanding for some time now, and nobody had really defeated them. There was a Kona effort, there was a Saga effort, there was an effort in the Burger Zone where Palm Rashidia's Corona branch was, that provided all of the food that AOTS was trying to kill off so it could cause mass starvation. And there was efforts on the east by the ICA, and there were all of these kind of forces basically holding the line against AOTSK, but there was no real major coordinated effort for them all to sort of counterattack or work together too closely. But that would, in time, change. The loyalists to the Third Republic, the ones who had basically kept the name the Third Republic of Corona, and tried to establish themselves as the true, heirs to the Third Republic name, would eventually turn into the North Star Republic, and be taken over by a new president known as Blasto, who was very loud, very big, very strong, and he believed in self-improvement and helping yourself through working out, basically, and looking after yourself and believing in yourself. And he would kind of start off as this kind of loudmouth at the head of this faction, but would in time become this really big rallying figure for the entire region. And this would be the sort of start where a load of the different factions started to really kind of speak to one another and coordinate and go, well, we're all fighting the army of the Synopticon. The Annihilationists have mostly been destroyed by this point. AFA has been cured by the efforts of the Night Watch under Reggie, a very important figure who we'll get to a bit later. And these guys are the biggest threat now. The army is the biggest threat. We're holding them on all these fronts, but some of them are pretty strenuous at best. We need to work together. We need to stop them. And so this big build-up of forces began, which would culminate in a massive joint assault, basically, a joint counterattack that would see the forces of Kona coming from the west. You would have the efforts of the Black Sail organization creating a virus that would take out a lot of the Coronan vessels that were still being used by the army. Because bear in mind, you might think of the army of the Synopticon, the army of the Panopticon being these, almighty psychic armies that can do this, that, and the other. But the army of the Synopticon Corona was actually an extremely conventional fighting force. They were a bunch of humans, more or less, with more esoteric Panopticon and Synopticon elements here and there, who were mostly using Coronan ships and Coronan tactics and Coronan forces. And so they were very much a sort of, a conventional war going on. It was just they had so much manpower, resources, and vessels that it was very hard for anyone else to properly challenge them. But you had Kona go in from the east with the help of BSO shutting all down their Coronan forces. You had the North Star Republic that went in from the south, along with Saga. They went in and helped out there. I'm pretty sure Meta also helped out as well in that area. You had the ICA and a bunch of other forces helped out by Biden and the network going in from the east, coming in to attack. And you also had the forces from the Burger Zone and the kind of the Burger Line, as they called it, the defense line there, coming down from the north. And they counterattacked, and they actually pushed back AOTSK. For the first time, it hadn't been just holding action. They'd actually counterattacked, they defeated enemy forces, and they pushed further. And AOTSK's territory, for the first time in the entire, theatre, shrank, and they lost ground. And it was a big cause for celebration. Everyone was very, morale high about this. AOTSK pushed back again, this time pushing northeast, if I remember correctly, towards the Onion of Worlds, the Ancerious Galactic Library, in what would be called the Northern Push. They would actually cut East and West Corona off from one another entirely. And this caused a something to be set up called the Milk Run, which was a big wormhole network line that would facilitate movement back and forth. This eventually got cut off by AOTS, and it would be up to the Surstein and the efforts of a ship called the Lance Queen to run the gauntlet and deliver the cure for the AFA to Eastern Corona, which was this big sort of monumental effort. Now, as AOTSK pushed north and cut off these two sides, they overextended themselves, and there was a massive push from East and West Corona in the north called the Northern Pincer, and it cut off and encircled a massive part of the AOTSK forces, and they surrendered. They actually surrendered. The army of the Synopticon Corona surrendered those forces. Big moment. Huge morale boost. The enemy could be defeated. They could be destroyed. They could surrender. Not all was lost. Everything's going to be okay. And that was the turning point. AOTSK never gained ground again. They continue to be beaten back. However, if we leave the AOTSK for the moment and them fighting with the whole galaxy, in the northeast, the efforts of the Nucleans, Lillian, the Network, and a few other factions suddenly realised that the big bad threat that Biden had been set up to eradicate was now knocking on their doorstep, and that was the Old Invaders. Now, the Old Invaders were, or are, a von Neumann swarm, made up of probes. Trillions of probes. It's like fighting the tide. yeah, each probe individually is, worse than even some of the worst warships in Ancerios. But it doesn't matter, because your massive gigafleet is going to run out of ammunition and fuel before you even make a slight fraction of a dent in a swarm of OI probes. And they'd slowly been approaching Borealia, again and again, closer, until they finally hit the outer reaches. And when they finally hit the systems in front of them, they consumed them. They ate whole worlds, and they just replicated more of themselves. And everyone kind of went, shit, okay, that's a real problem. And they tried to make a united front line. This went very poorly. There wasn't anywhere near as much coordination in the east as there was against AOTSK. The network tried so much, and so did Lillian, to orchestrate a major defense. But by the time a major defense was orchestrated, lots and lots and lots of the northeast had already been consumed and converted and turned into more OI probes. But it wasn't just the OI probes that were the problem. They had also identified different OI ships. These ships were called Econs, or Shepherds. And they were a real threat. They were very advanced, and they seemed to control the swarms where they went. Now, the Metasax and the Shemeshi actually identified a cluster of 3 Econs and engaged them out beyond the bounds of the defense line. And they managed to get their kills at the cost of their own lives. And it gave everyone basically a very important set of information of what these Econs could do. And more, this kind of defensive line was set up, trying to hold the OI back. Again, it was like stopping the tide from coming in with a sandcastle. Not exactly easy. And a lot of the Mitre factions came over to assist in setting up this defense. Unfortunately, some of the factions decided that in order to properly defend, sacrifices had to be made. And in terms of the Sodalites, they committed huge atrocities and genocide with the support of several other factions against the local Coronans in that area in order to, create self-propagating weapon systems that could try and hold back the tide. Same with the Shemeshi, a magical people who managed to open up a gateway to their god's realm, and they didn't want to leave it. They sacrificed a load of the Coronans, used them for soul rituals, etc., and fortified their area. And later on, as the old invaders would basically take over the region, the Shemeshi would fight a last-ditch hope, effectively, a massive apocalyptic battle with the old invaders before their portal to their godly realm would be closed at the cost of basically all of their existences. So you had, the OI coming in from the northeast, you had AOTSK being fought in the middle, and you also had the cliffside. And we haven't touched on the cliffside yet, but the cliffside is the southwestern portion of Borealia. Now, the cliffside is not part, or was not part, of the Third Republic of Corona. It was a vassal state, and it was a buffer zone created by the Coronans to ensure that anyone who was coming up from the main galaxy would have to fight their way through the cliffside to get to them. And so the cliffside was made up of not just Coronans, but many other species and factions who had been, conquered and made subservient over the years through genetic alterations, and oppression and the like, yeah? Across many generations. And so they had all risen up against the Third Republic and tried to, carve out their own futures again, basically, with independence. And so some, there was Third Republic loyalists, there were those who wanted independence, there were those who vehemently wanted independence and to stay divided at any cost, and there was a multitude of other different factions. Into this came Mita and also other factions who tried to basically turn Cliffside into a staging area. And also try to unify some of the factions and get some sort of coalition going, which seemed to work, and it would build the foundation to some major stuff that would happen later. There would be some major fighting in the Cliffside between the Freikorps, who were there, who basically tried to take over the region, along with some of the Third Republic loyalists trying to fight some of the smaller factions, and battles between Yamanakako, who were trying to keep up the blockade when the AFA was running rampant, and the likes of EOS and other locals. And so you had these three kind of areas of Corona going on all at once. All the while, you also had in the southeast, you had the ASN, the Telerans, decided to send a delegation to Corona, to put it politely, to find out absolutely how much they could ransack and take over before the old invaders got to them, and then they decided to try and get that loot out, basically. They were trying to get as much out as possible, and were willing to work with anyone to do it. And at the same time in the southeast, you also had the birth of the Rat King. Now, the Rat King, word has it, was just a normal Coronan. A normal Coronan, nothing special, who got so angry, who felt such rage, that he became a living star of pure burning white flame, and he channeled the holy scorn to the point that no other living being yet has. And the Rat King had only one task, and that was to destroy, to end everything, cleanse everything through fire. Parmadif had been a follower of the Scorn, and his method of destroying was through corruption, viruses, decay. But the Rat King, it was very simple. Cleansing fire. Cleansing fire will do the job. And so these sickly white flames began to engulf more and more systems, turning any who were affected into these undead husks. Basically, ships, people, you name it, were turned into these undead blazing husks. And through the efforts of the Huron technocracy and the Singers and a few other of the local factions like Ranksy, they managed to contain the efforts of the Rat King and push it back. And in expecting to find territory and, forces, they actually found little in the way other than blasted barren worlds that had been scoured of life. And they decided that they would converge on the system that the Rat King had originally come from, confront the Rat King and kill it. Unfortunately, when they got there, they found out that the Rat King was actually a living star. And there was no way they were going to be able to kill that. And so they had to withdraw. But the Rat King disappeared. He just vanished. Nobody knows where the Rat King has gone. This huge-ass Scorn Scion that, is immensely powerful, just disappeared. Nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows where it is to this day. So, there's a mystery for you. Mysterious stuff. Maybe he'll turn up in the future. Find out next week. So, where have we got to? We've covered the southeast, we've covered the northeast and the OI, we've covered AOTSK, we've covered Cliffside. We haven't covered the multitude of atrocities that got committed into putting Coronans in death... Oh no, we partially talked about the Coronan death camps of the Sodalites and the work camps of other people in Meta. That was a bit strange. Talked about the Burger Zone in the Milk Run. And we talked about Blasto rallying the North Star Republic. Now, Blasto would become quite a rallying figure for the United Coalition, because he didn't want to create the Third Republic of Corona again. He wanted to create and perpetuate the North Star Republic. He wanted to bring those Coronans who wanted to be part of the nation under his banner. And so the North Star Republic expanded outwards. And he taught Coronans to be themselves, to better themselves, and to reject the power of the fragment. Yeah? Coronans could better themselves and become human again if they cut themselves off from the fragment, if they didn't rely on its power. You know, they could do this independently of the Panopticon. They didn't need to you know, be with the army and connect themselves to the army in order to get their own benefits. And so Blasto worked with all of these other factions. You know, at this point, Saga, Kona, ICA, Meta, the Network, all of these factions had kind of come together roughly into this big coalition, and this galactic coalition, and had pushed back AOTSK almost to the territory that they had held at the start. Now, obviously, Erondel in the army of the Synopticon, the army of the Panopticon, had bigged himself up to be this, you know, oh, well, I'm the one who's leading the Panopticon to victory. Look at all of this territory that I've gained, all these people that I now command, all these ships. I'm beating the United Forces of the Galaxy, and I've now got my own branch. Yeah? He'd talked himself up to this point, and now he was losing all of it. Everything that the army had done in Corona was being thrown out the window because Arundel had tried to expand too far and was now paying the price for it. And this caused issues, and this started sending shockwaves through the army of the Panopticon structure, and it started making Lycos worried. And during this period, Lycos was kind of, again, you know, he was becoming more and more powerful, more and more immersed in the Panopticon, more and more dementia-ridden. Yeah, he wasn't really with it at this point. And he was being informed of everything that was going on by Heikel, the now Sage Commander of the Army of the Panopticon, the dude in charge, after Lycos, of all of these happenings, because Heikel was taking care of Lycos, because Lycos's physical body was starting to deteriorate as well, along with his mind. And during these proceedings of being told what was going on, Lycos got a bit distracted, and he focused on these two Coronans, if I remember correctly, who were arguing over rations. If I'm remembering this correctly, Swing, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it was two Coronans arguing
Yes,
over.
it was two Coronans arguing over some leftover rations. They got in a fight, and then their NCO, squad leader, whatever, decided that the rations should go to one of them. And Lycos, in the middle of his, like, what do you call it? Like a psionic bliss or something. He's all-seeing psionic bliss. Saw this like little irrelevant thing, and then asked himself, okay, what authority does this man, this sergeant, have to arbitrate this dispute? That sent him in an extremely long downward spiral of questioning himself and the nature of the army of the Panopticon.
Indeed. And this spiral kept going. And eventually, he came to a very simple conclusion. And that is, why are we here? Who are we? And who gives us the right to do what we do? Are you a subject, or are you somebody? And so...
Subject or object?
A subject or object. And so, Armand Lycos makes an objective decision. And that is, the army of the Panopticon, the army of Synopticon, everyone who follows in it, has his blessing. He is the one who makes the decision. He is the one who tells, you know, whatever is out there, whoever is out there, that everything that they do in the pursuit of their goals, in the pursuit of the army, is right. Yeah? Is right. It's okay. He gives them that power. He gives them that blessing. Yeah? However, He then, in this all-seeing bliss, this state of kind of strange sonic dementia, of kind of being in and out of focus and seeing everything, looks upon Borealia and asks two very simple questions to every sentient in the entire region. Who are you, and why are you here? Because he answered for the army of the Panopticon and everyone involved in that. So everyone else should answer as well. They should be able to answer these questions and say who they are and why they are here. And this manifested in an event called Pareidolia. And Lycos's questions took the form of a sonic shockwave of such unimaginable power that every sentient in Borealia was immediately sent into this kind of weird trance-like dream state, where they were confronted and asked these questions, and they had to answer. It wasn't like I refuse to answer, yeah. And they could answer only one of two ways. They could answer if they were a subject, or they could answer if they were an object. And if they answered wrongly, Lycos absented them. He destroyed their souls. He destroyed their mandala and turned them into walking zombies, basically. Mindless absence. And so everything that had been going absolutely perfectly, AOTSK was being defeated, the OI was starting to be held, everything collapsed. Absolutely everything. All of the forces that were fighting stopped in their tracks. All of the population across Borealia stopped in their tracks. Everything got stopped. Now, this massive sonic shockwave and everything that happened during Pareidolia also had ramifications for the army, because the army of the Panopticon went, holy fucking shit, what just happened? Because they hadn't planned for this. This wasn't planned. This wasn't some, all big just as planned 4D chess. This was okay, Lycos just psionic slot 1000 everyone's minds in Borealia. And so the army of the Panopticon proper, not the army of the Synopticon, the army of the Panopticon proper, under orders of the command staff themselves, deployed. Because they said, well, if Arundel's getting his ass handed to him, yeah, and we're losing all of this fucking region, and we put all of this work in, we're going to make something out of it. And so they mobilised the horseman fleets. There were 6 horsemen. And they rode. Now, these horseman fleets were made up of anywhere between 30 to 60 ships. And they were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Each horseman fleet rode into the middle of these combined coalition fleets made up of Kona, Saga, ICA, North Star Republic, you name it. And they scythed their way through. Not just because these crews had obviously been massively afflicted by Pareidolia, but also because these ships were just insanely powerful on a scale not yet seen. At the same time, Xerxes Alesso, seeing Arundel, a previous student of his, fail so spectacularly, and seeing this guy's hubris bring down the army in this fashion, causing such, defeat and devastation, actually confronted Arundel and killed him. And in the process, sublimated a portion of their sort of core territory of what was the Third Republic straight into the Panopticon proper. And as you can tell probably from this, everything was screwed. Absolutely everything was screwed. Because it gets better. The old invaders also were affected by Pareidolia. And Lycos asked them his questions. Who are you and why are you here? And they were unaffected. Because they distributed that psionic power through their entire network. And there are so many old invader probes out there, so many econs out there in the space between galaxies, that it was like diluting, a drop of pure ethanol in the Atlantic Ocean. But it did trigger changes in them, because they responded to the sudden uptick in psychic power by combining their probes into more advanced probes and also creating more econs. And so the OI came on even stronger. Now invigorated by pareidolia, they swarmed over the defences of the northeast, and everything started going to shit. And each of these horsemen, these panopticon fleets, rode out, and they killed everything before them. Yeah, all the while, Lycos himself and his honor guard in this newly ordained army of the Logos, which he had called himself, and this very strange collection of very powerful entities around him, also rode out to fight the old invaders. In the process, they obliterated the Meter and Sodalite sort of defensive front lines, and they went out and obliterated God knows how many old invaders in the process. All the while, the poor galaxy and the poor galaxy coalition are trying to come to their senses. You know, what the hell just happened? And there were many, many who answered correctly. They stood up to Lycos. Hell, they stuck it to him in some instances, like Ruther, where she stabbed him in the eye. And these people who had managed to survive started congregating together. You know, bands of resistance, bands of forces that could actually fight together, work together, operate together. And everyone came to the same conclusion. Borealia's lost. There is no way that they can stand against what's coming. With the old invaders, with the army of the Panopticon, everything's going to hell. We need to get out of here. We need to fortify the galaxy. We need to warn the galaxy. And we need to try and prevent this whole shebang from getting worse. And so there was this whole thing going on to try and, organise some resistance. But that came from an unexpected quarter. Because on the Onion of Worlds, which was this huge megastructural trash pile, Scylla, a Novi individual, managed to discover the true nature of the megastructure, just as a Panopticon horseman fleet was attacking, and discovered that this massive megastructure was a battle arc, a sun-sized structure created in ancient times by the Yukigir in the Overmind era to ride out beyond the galaxy and to fight the old invaders in the intergalactic void, called Anwin. And they activated it. And they brought this battle arc online, and it fought off these horsemen. And it projected a message to all of Borealia saying, come here, and we will fight together, we will escape Borealia, and we will defy the army. We will win. And so, the Exodus began. Survivors from all over Borealia started flooding into Anwin. And so Anwin was plotted to have a series of jumps. It would jump around Borealia, around the sort of area controlled by the army of the Panopticon, and would pick up as many survivors as possible on its way to the cliffside in order to try and possibly create some sort of defensive line there. And while Anwin was kind of hoovering up these survivors, the Exalted Network had not been idle, and now turned Biden on the old invaders as much as they could, but they knew that it wouldn't hold them forever. And so their main overseer there, Quavaton, managed to hijack a load of ships that had been not destroyed, but had been taken out because all of their crews had been absented. And he hijacked all these thousands of ships that had been left floating in space and created this kind of ghost army, this ghost navy, to hold back the forces of the old invaders to buy time for Anwin to escape the east of Corona. And it worked. He held back the line, but it wasn't quite enough. And so the network decided to deploy some interesting tactics, so to say. And they detonated liminant weapons across a wide border and created a liminant incursion in front of the old invaders. And it worked. For the first time in recorded history, the old invaders not only stopped advancing, but they withdrew. For the first time ever. And they withdrew from the area. And then they started building something. But, for the time being, the region had been saved. And thanks to that, the forces that had managed to survive in the southeast, under the ASN and the Singers, Sub of Novi, Carnath, and a few others, did their own exodus. They tried to make a run for it, trying to escape the area. Now, unlike the exodus proper with Anwin, these guys effectively had to take all their fuel, all their equipment with them. But the ASM wasn't going to leave without their treasure. And they created what was effectively a treasure fleet. And they went as far as they could, and they sacrificed as many as they could to keep themselves going so that they got out of Corona with as much of their treasure as possible. Because during this period, the old invaders weren't just the only ones who were encroaching on that area. A new region called Hyperborea had been created when a bunch of Coronans had mistakenly decided to worship old invader probes and had infected their own territory. And this had created a sort of weird pseudo area where everything was kind of normal, but everyone was infected by probes. And these people kind of lived in sort of a dream world, something called Agartha, because, and as would be discovered, the old invader network that everyone in Hyperborea was linked into has something called concrete universality, which was a revelation completely beyond sort of almost anything else that had happened so far. And they had been steadily encroaching outwards, and so the network had not only tried to stop the old invaders in their tracks, but they'd also tried to stop Hyperborea from connecting to the old invaders, making everything worse, which the Liminant Breach had successfully done. And the ASN, on their way back through to try and escape the region, had actually fed ships from various factions to Hyperborea in exchange for them not to be attacked. So there was real black fucking, sacrifices going on there to ensure that they got their loot out. So, everything, however, didn't quite go the Panopticon's way. They were annihilating what had once been the Burger Zone defense line, carving their way through Palm Rashidia. But that soon ran into trouble because the Unnamed, who had just been horrifically violated in their species' eyes because they'd just been forced to answer who they were and why they were here, which, if you know anything about the Unnamed, revealing anything about themselves is possibly the highest sort of, what's the word that I could use?
Dishonor?
Heresy, insults.
Anathema, like doing so is literally anathema to them. It's the worst possible thing that could happen to their species. And so the Unnamed went from this kind of like background faction that had sort of kind of helped against AOTSK to this, hey, we're going to actually frontline now and we're going to annihilate these bastards and we're going to fight the horsemen and we're going to kill them. And they went to Palm Rashidia and they said, you're a big biological tumor that can produce food. Here's a little seed. In it is all the genetic engineering material needed to produce unnamed bioships. We're going to give this to you, and you're going to pump out ships in their thousands, and we're going to kill these guys. We're going to wipe them out entirely. And Palm Rashidia said yes. Said yes, it would help. It would help defend the galaxy against the army of the Panopticon and the Old Invaders, which was the first time that Palm Rashidia had intervened since the Boreal Jihad, where it was forced to kill its brother, Palm Madif. And because also its niece died during Paradolia, which was my fam, the hive mind that was adored around the galaxy. And she died in Paradolia. The whole hive mind was wiped out. And so Palm made it stand. And the Horseman fleet that was attacking there got bogged down and actually couldn't make any progress because it was getting attacked on all sides by unnamed bioships. And so Lycos himself had to intervene with the army of the Logos. And Lycos actually made contact with Palm Rashidia and invited it to join the army of the Panopticon. You know, you've been around for a long time. You have an overmind echo within you, within your hive mind. Join us. You know, I have the fragment of perseverance here. We can make something better. And Palm went along with it. And, you know, kind of played lip service. And then Palm Rashidia attacked Lycos and tried to do what it had done to its brother, Palm Medivh, and sonically kill it. Palm tried to sonically kill Lycos. And for a moment, it appeared it worked. But it turned out it was just an illusion, and Lycos was far more powerful than Palm Rashidia could ever hope to achieve. And in a sort of form of punishment, Lycos didn't want to kill Palm because he actually sees Palm Rashidia as like a brother. In return, he killed the entirety of the Borealian part of Palm Rashidia. So this huge hive mind across the galaxy had part of its soul shorn from it in punishment of saying, you know, this is what it is like to die, but not die. This is what you're going to experience. And this sort of resistance in the galactic northwest fell as a result. But again, still, everything didn't quite go the Panopticon's way, because Horseman Fleet Dvi, who was pushing south to try and annihilate much of what remained of the North Star Republic and cut off the advance of the Exodus and the Treasure Fleet, was intercepted by a combined force of the Kuosk, the Black Sail Organization, ARM, I believe, and a few other nations, along with the help of a superweapon created by the network, mated to a Black Sail Organization superweapon, using a relic called the Harp. And the Harp cancelled psionics in a large AoE and completely cut off the Horseman fleet from its control, because Horseman fleets don't have any crew. They are puppeted directly from the Panopticon. And it completely shut it all down. Apart from the flagship vessel, the Ramayana, that was being controlled. And so this big coalition of these factions went in and they destroyed Fleet Dvi. But even though there was only one Ramayana that was fighting at massively reduced effectiveness, it was the only resistance they had, they took massive losses in doing so. But they destroyed Horseman Fleet Dvi. And that was the first Horseman fleet defeat. Not long after it had been deployed either. So it was quite a big morale victory. And it was a massive step as well. This wouldn't be the only Horseman fleet defeat. If I remember correctly, Shaptam? G2, am I remembering that correctly?
I keep on mixing up Shaptan and Shunya. Was Shunya? Oh yeah, the Shunya was the one that maneuvered later on. Shaptan was the one that got incinerated in Adwin's orbit.
Okay. So,
Partially.
it was actually, so Shaptam had initially engaged Anwin, and they were the ones who got driven off initially. Operational Group Ika, the Horseman Ika, kind of shadowed Anwin and kind of partially blockaded it, but didn't engage. And then Operational Group Hashad actually decided to attack Anwin. Now, Anwin was collecting a load more refugees and a load more survivors when it was confronted by a Zetyan warlord who decided to use a captured Slot 2 superweapon to hold it hostage. He failed, and was annihilated thanks to the efforts of the defensive fleets that were created by the founding of Annex, which, G2, if you want to talk about Annex, you're more than welcome to.
So also just a key bit of detail, it is specifically the Zetan commander Atet that warned the Exodus of like the incoming Slot 2 and gave them the extra time to prepare and intercept the FTL Merv and take out the warlord. So Annex is the kind of like ancestor to CIM. It was this very spontaneous military organization which formed between all the different refugees that Anwen picked up during the time. It began with Admiral Sarah Tenax, but then it grew to include all of the who would eventually become the founders of SIM. And it acted as a civilian and military authority for Anwen until it crossed the threshold into the safety of Cliffside. Concurrent to the creation and efforts of Annex, which managed 3 different fleets, one for scouting, one for defense, and one for logistics. There was the Lance Queen arc. Vic, do you wanna talk about the Lance Queen arc?
We're gonna have to backtrack way above. I don't know how much has been already discussed about what the Lance Queen was and why it was there.
I've gone over the fact that it was used to do the milk run and deliver the AFA cure into Eastern Corona.
Oh, okay. So, during Pareidolia, what Lycus and his honor guard themselves did, their first like combat action, was a decapitation strike against the Republic of the North Star, which included like killing the president, trying to kill Reggie. They almost succeeded in the latter. They succeeded in the former. All the while, the Lance Queen was back at Anwen, recovering from all damage that it had sustained during during the milk run and during its linking up of both fleets to isolate the northern operational group of the army of the Synopticon. It gets so the ship finally gets restored, and they make a run to rescue her original captain, the leader of the Night Watch, Reggie, who was still alive, who had not answered Pareidolia, but who was pregnant, and her children did, in like some non-language way, because they're like little zygotes. They make it all the way over there, deep within enemy territory, fighting off somebody who had pledged allegiance to Lycus and the army of the Panopticon to survive Pareidolia, who had hijacked the Lance Queen's successor, which was called Synth Angel, if I'm not mistaken, and G2, yep. Who was controlling that ship, like the enemy ship.
So they were part of the Burger Line back when Corona was lighthearted and was about stopping the evil AOTSK. It was someone who answered but pledged themselves to Lycos. It was Death Knight Gilgamesh, who
yes.
had been piloting this weird, fucking unnecessarily massive upgrade, which was this big political show for the Lance Queen. And he had basically rampaged through the entire vessel and strung everyone up into this bizarre hanging Solarite computer that used everyone's nervous systems to operate this gigantic hospital ship into this horrible thing that casted Solarite and pulled vessels through the Luminous in order to capture them. and take their crew as well.
So the Lance Queen fights against that, and take into account that the Lance Queen was always a hospital ship, and even though it got upgraded, it was never armed. So it came down to Scylla to personally fight Gilgamesh.
Yeah,
vacuum of
there
space.
was a
And kind of, yes?
yeah. They boarded the Synth Angel and eventually had a battle on the bridge, where Scylla lost a comrade, but eventually managed to outsmart Gilgamesh by maneuvering in a certain way that tied a Solarite noose around Gilgamesh. And when the bridge was depressurized by a salvo from a shuttle, Gilgamesh essentially got hung by Solarite as the vessel plunged into OI space, eventually regrouping with the Honor Guard. But importantly, the Lance Queen had survived.
The Lance Queen had survived, and it went on to fly to Olamai, which used to be the capital of the Northern Star Republic and where it had been first declared. It scanned over the wreckage, and it found that the presidential palace had been just completely obliterated, but a few of the characters who had been riding with the Lance Queen all along decided to go down there as a kind of last-ditch hope to find somebody alive, and they did. Reggie had been there for weeks. I don't know how long she was under the rubble trap with her legs crushed, unable to move, and kind of unwilling to move because she had just been traumatized. Her husband got killed. Everyone she knew practically got killed. All she did had been for nothing, and she didn't feel like getting up, which is why she didn't answer Pareidolia in the first place. Meanwhile, to backtrack even more, while all of this is happening, and this huge amount of absence are created, the army of the Synoptic and Panopticon start dividing them into different groups. Okay, we have a ton of absence. They don't do anything on their own. They're going to need to be controlled by either liminal watchmen or Sheol AI, or we are going to sell them to people from White Maginot. We're going to sell people from White Maginot the opportunity of a lifetime, which is to come back to the material realm as hive minds and feel the thrill of life once again, controlling souls like they're gods. And one of them did. An old Baron, an old Junker from the Harshlands, took over several thousand of these absents, and he wanted Reggie, who he believed was absented or dead, to be kind of a standard bearer, just flex on the galaxy. Look at this person that was once your hope. Now she's carrying my banner, and she's leading my company of lands now. And he starts LARPing as if it is his olden days, in the equivalent of the 16th century. Amassing this pike and shot formation, going over to recover Reggie, and he finds her alive, and says, okay, no problem, I'm just going to kill her, then I'm going to take over her body. She struggles a bit. She finds the will to survive again, also thanks to one of her crewmates. And just in time, just as she was about to be taken over and subsumed into the hive mind that's being controlled by this weirdo who paid a ton of money to the Synopticon, the shell arrives, straight from the Lance Queen. And while he was too busy LARPing as this pike and shot formation from the 16th century, they show up with a minigun, and they just spray everyone, and immediately come down with shotguns and start fighting off this guy, who is forced to retreat. And he loses his this precious sword that is 1,000 years old, that used to belong to him way back in the day when he unified some province in the Harshland. Reggie gets successfully rescued, brought up to the Lance Queen, and she's super surprised and extremely thankful about the fact that people still believed in her, even when she herself did not. But now the problem was getting out of Olamai, which was now deep behind enemy lines. So they just bolted it straight to the Anwin as fast as they could, utilizing the fact that Lance Queen, the only thing that had kept Lance Queen alive thus far was her speed. So okay, let's just pedal to the metal, go and meet and win again. The local Synopticon forces managed to redirect 3 local frigates or interceptors to intercept the Lance Queen, and the crew either evade, destroy, or outmaneuver each one of these 3 attempts. But then they came around for one last pass, because each interceptor got 2 opportunities to strike the Lance Queen. They got rid of 5 out of 6 attempts at interception. The 6th seemed like it was going to be lost. And then comes Silvada, who all this time had been preparing this super mega fighter to deploy from Anwin, and meets just at the exact moment to save Lance Queen from the last attempt at interception. With the help of Black Seal Organization pirate, hacker, who managed to hack into Shaw, that had been remotely piloting all of this ship, to throw them off just a little bit, enough for Silvada to come and kill them, and also giving them enough time to start deactivating the autopilot. Because by then, these crews belonged to the original AOTSK. They were Coronans. They had seen what had happened to their homeland. Now they were just tagging along in their own ship. And Lance Queen got back home safe, but now the Panopticon had a much bigger problem in its hands. Is Marek back?
Yeah, I am back indeed.
Oh.
So, basically, the Lance Queen gets back, if I remember correctly, at the exact moment that the Zetian superweapon is destroyed by the forces of Annex, and as operational group Hashad attacks, if I remember correctly. They all 3 coincided at once. And Hashad, being a full-on horseman, decides to attack Anwin directly and destroys many of the refugees in orbit as possible before it jumps. Now, Anwin's defenses are pretty damn powerful, but the whole horseman came in just as one, yeah, in a single just do or die maneuver, and the only thing that could prevent them from getting in amongst all these civilian vessels that were lugging around equipment, replacement parts, food, water, fuel, all of this really important stuff, was if all of the forces, all of these, several thousand ships that had survived Pareidolia and everything that had happened, turn and fight. And they did. And it was basically the charge of the Light Brigade. They went out and they fought Hashad. And they got a few kills in the process, and they held the horsemen back at any cost. And even some of the civilian ships joined in anyway in this major heroics. And they took outrageous amounts of losses. So many were killed, so many were lost. But in the end, Anwin actually turned out to have much longer range weapons than people thought, and people had theorized that it did. And Tenax, I believe, managed to bring them back online, and didn't outright destroy Hashad, but crippled it, and scattered it to the wind. And Anwin once again managed to jump to the next area safely. But that wasn't all for Hashad, because while the Liminant Breach in the east had kept Hyperborea and the Old Invaders from consolidating, the Old Invaders hadn't been idle, and they created these series of massive stations that nobody really knew what the hell they were. And they were, the network observed them from afar and began to implement contingency plans for anything that might happen, and thankfully Anwin had jumped away, so it had managed to do its job of saving all of the survivors, more or less, in this area of the galaxy. And these massive stations suddenly started shining like stars. Just so much energy went through them, and they interdicted on this like huge sector scale the Liminant breach and shut it down. Just in a single motion, they shut this Liminant breach that was, I think, probably thousands of light years across. And in the process, just completely immolated these stations. Like the stations just turned themselves into slag.
Judging by the scale of the Ancerious map and the size of Borealia, the tier was probably about the size of a galactic arm of the Milky Way.
Yeah, an absolutely truly monumental area. And so they came on. But the network had a plan. And would you like to explain, Drac? About Arkosh? Drac?
Arkosh
Oh, there we go.
was not exactly a plan, but was more of a fortunate coincidence. How fortunate people will call it later in history is a thing up for debate, but I digress. So, caught amidst the chaos in the southeast of Corona, between Hyperborea, the old invaders, the ALTS, there was still the old Biden station. Almost everyone on that station at this point had died. They were either killed by the station slowly deteriorating because the majority of the staff was deaf from pareidolia, or were killed by pareidolia itself. However, one individual network android across the station was in a very problematic predicament. They were on the verge of being sapient, but weren't quite yet. So what answered pareidolia for them was not itself, but its systems. So this android died again and again and again. However, those same systems that answered for it also brought it back every time. And so pareidolia repeated. First dozens of times, then hundreds, then thousands, and at some point it exceeded what is probably humanly possible to count, creating this loop of life and death, and eventually, through the repetition of this pattern, created a mandala. At this point, this android could have probably, on its own and truthfully, have answered pareidolia, but it was far too late. That android answered, but it didn't answer to Lycos. It didn't answer to pareidolia. This android, in its predicament, hated the world so much because nobody was a particular fault for what it had come to. It was simply the logical consequence of everything that had happened up to this point. So this android hated the world, and it hated it for everything it was. So it called out to the scorn, and what answered was the Rat King. In an explosion that could be seen from probably cliffside, once the light actually arrived there, Biden was torn apart in the birth of Arkosh, the first scorn elemental of the Rat King. Arkosh was nothing but hate. It hated everything. It was entropy, the end of all things. And it began to consume everything around Biden. In Biden's vicinity was a fleet which was under control of the Seer, because he had initially planned to destroy Biden to further his own goals in Borealia. which fleet was then handed down by Arkrosh. Arkrosh followed that fleet because it was life. It was at fault like everything else. Until that fleet disappeared and left Arkrosh with only one prominent nearby target. It was Horseman Fleet Hashad, who had come to investigate. Hashad, in a matter of minutes, annihilated Arkrosh with the power of its fleet and the Panopticon. However, the silence that followed was not complete. And through the strange Ouroboros of a mandala that reached from the past into the present, Arkrosh was once more reborn. And Arkrosh attacked Hashad. And Hashad, surprised by the attack, did actually take losses. The fight went on like this. Arkrosh dying dozens of times more, but every time it came back, and Hashad could not sustain this fight forever. So Hashad fled and led Arkrosh away from areas that would be problematic to its operation. In the end, where Arkrosh ended up and Hashad tagged out into the Liminus, was at the border, at the precipice of the old invader-controlled area, and that is the last which has been seen from Arkrosh. It is presumed Arkrosh, even to this day, is raging in these areas, annihilating old invaders.
Yep. And Arkrosh is helping to maintain the divide between the old invaders and Hyperborea to this day. Along with various other Panopticon elements that stay way the hell away. So, all while this is going on and Arkrosh is going mental, most of Borealia at this point has been destroyed. Has been taken over by the army, has been either conquered by the Horsemen or conquered by the army of the Synopticon forces, who are at this point commanding millions upon millions of absents. Yeah? Those who were absented during Paradolia are now being puppeted by the army en masse, giving them just almost unlimited manpower and forces at this point. However, there were still elements that weren't quite going according to the Army of the Panopticon's plan. And one of those was the operational group Gargan. Now, there were three types of people who answered in Paradolia. There were those who succeeded and survived, there were those who failed and died, and there were those who bowed to Lycos, and they became the Death Knights, as they were called. And these converts, or traitors, whichever one you want to put it, the most famous of which would be Liliana, the fragment of Lilian, who would turn to basically an adopted daughter of Lycos in his final days, would go out and help the Panopticon and the army of the Synopticon to conquer Borealia and ensure that any forces that were working alongside themselves beforehand were now effectively doing as much damage as possible. However, Operational Group Gargan had seen great things in AOTSK and Malsh Arundel. And they had seen Alesso kill Arundel and AOTSK effectively be cast to the wayside. Yeah? By the rest of the army. They had failed. And that was it. They were consigned to oblivion. Many AOTSK units were just abandoned in systems just to fend for themselves. And some of which would be co-opted into the new growing army of the Decepticon under Desir. who would eventually be basically traitors to their own kind. And Operational Group Gargan made a stand, and he would have a standoff with Liliana, effectively demanding justice. That justice be done for Arundel's death, and that AOTSK forces should be treated fairly and justly as the heroes that they were. However, this came to blows, and with infighting going on in the army of the Panopticon, this was like a real no-no for the command staff, for Alesso, for Lycos, for everyone. And Alesso himself actually intervened, and Liliana also intervened, and together Gargan was killed and his forces were destroyed. And in the process, Gargan would also join the growing army of the Decepticon. At this point, Anwin was nearly there, was nearly in the cliffside. The people in the cliffside had, at this point, dealt with much of the threats that had been going on, like the Freikorps, etc. The North Star Republic, the survivors, had moved the capital from Borealia into Cliffside, and much of the sort of factions who had been previously warring had now come together and started building up defences because they knew that something crazy was coming. Cliffside, however, had its share of problems. Paradolia still affected Cliffside, and Golden Dawn, who were Eosians, had seen the golden light of Lycos and the Great Eye, and saw it as Eos himself. And so these willing converts in Eosian space, who had basically set up humanitarian areas in a DMZ, suddenly became the army's eyes and ears and forces in Cliffside. And they began to march on the North Star Republic, Yamanakako, Ferropetrovsk, all of these other factions. And there was a concerted effort in the Cliffside to first contain and then finally wipe out Golden Dawn, which was not a particularly easy thing to do. But, you know, a bunch of Eosians actually turned up later as well, sent in a crusade to cleanse the traitors, effectively. And Anwin made its way through the southwest of Borealia. And in the process, it met up with the remnants of the Mitre forces that were still in Borealia, and took on the last survivors to stay within its bounds and to then safely jump into Cliffside. Once again, it would fight another operational group, Shunya, although this time indirectly, after another major Coronan who was kind of following in Blasto's footsteps, Kritzmore would basically go down swinging and fight Shunya on his own terms, and the survivors would make their way to Anwin as a final sort of act of defiance, basically. Finally, Anwin would jump into the cliffside, and Borealia would be abandoned. It would be left to fester and whatever the hell the army wanted to do with it. While the forces in Cliffside and the survivors of Paradolia and Borealia consolidated their position and tried to work out what the hell happened. And at this point, news of what had happened in Borealia spread to the main galaxy, and this, along with the super weapon exchange, was what made a load of the factions of the galaxy step away from the precipice of, you know, total destruction and go, holy shit, we have a massive problem in Borealia. The army of the Panopticon and the Old Invaders are a serious threat. So, what's going on in Borealia today? Well, the army control basically all of the Third Republic of Corona X territories. They are constantly fighting with Hyperborea and the Old Invaders in a endless hell hyper war, where the Old Invaders and Hyperborea just send endless probes and forces at the army of the Panopticon, and the army of the Panopticon send endless endlessly resurrecting forces in response, being controlled by the Shoal and Shear AI known as Aggregate, if I remember correctly. So it's this kind of completely devoid of emotion hyper war of these two forces just endlessly slogging it out. But Borealia is now being used as a staging point by the army. They're consolidating their forces. They have been repairing their horsemen. And Liliana has basically created her own territory here, Terra Liliana, which she is using for her own devices as well. So it's now become army territory, and they're doing funky stuff up there, but nobody quite knows entirely what they're up to. There are recon flights, and they have been testing the defenses of the galaxy, and the Hyperboreans have been doing that as well, because Cliffside is now united. Cliffside is now pretty much the front line of the galaxy. They found a lot of support by galactic nations who seek to keep as many refugees and forces there as possible and funnel funding and supplies in, that have now built something called the Ancerious Absolute Defense Line. And the ADL is kind of what it says on the tin. It's a ever-expanding wall of defense satellites, gun platforms, one-shot laser projectors, star bases, massive star forts, rapid reaction forces, all of these defenses that have been built across this vast area of space, coordinated by a reforged and remade Biden under the control of the network, and overseen by the last battle arc, Anwin, of course, that is the centre and anchor of the line. Reggie has also gone on to take control of the North Star Republic, and this area is now, thankfully, a lot more unified than it once was. There's still trouble up in the north, but after what they've kind of seen happen, and now what's at stake, it is, the front line. It's kind of a bit of a forlorn hope, but people think that they can hold, and it is now ever tested by the Hyperboreans and the army of the Panopticon proper in very high-speed raids. And so, that's it. Who knows when the army of the Panopticon will try to break through the ADL and ride down into the galaxy, and who knows how many Coronan refugees will try to spread now down into the galactic disk, now that they don't have a proper home to go to anymore. So, mysterious stuff afoot, and lots of stuff to do in the future. So, does anyone have any questions? That's the real question. And I just want to preface, a lot more happened than what I've just told you. The stuff that I've gone over are like the main story beats. So much happened in the Coronan Theatre RP that we would be here for at least 5 hours, if not more, for me to try and cover it. Yeah? The RP itself stretched on for a year. And in that time, we wrote truly astronomical amounts of story. Okay? The best story I've ever read. Period. But even I can't cover it all in that time. So if I've missed anything out that you were part of, it's not because I don't consider it major or, not important. Every contribution to this story arc was amazing and I loved it. But, good lord, I don't want to be sat here talking for 6 hours. So, no hard feelings on if I missed anything out. But is there any questions at all? I don't see anyone.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. Yeah, go
on. Is Cliffside Ank 85 going to be mapped out? Because I feel it could be useful pointing out who's where
Yes.
relative to the ADL.
Yes. Yes, it will be. Cliffside will be. To be fair, I might do an updated version of the Borealia map in general. And put everything up to the sort of what it is today. Okay. Vic, a question for you. Explain why Mai were affected by corona.
Mice had been brought to Borealia to do some. They did construction and heavy engineering. And if I'm not mistaken, they were brought in for similar duties in the in Borealia, in places that had already been like cleared of enemies, because nobody saw Pareidolia coming.
Because Corona was a big producer of dino nuggies, they originally came to protest the rising prices, and then they were kind of talked out of it, saying, "We can secure your dino nugget prices if you do engineering work for us." And then that was the agreement, and they were kind of peacefully operating where in like the quote safe zones in Corona.
Yes. So when Pareidolia came, she got asked like a few of the mice got caught in the range of Pareidolia. But because they're a hive mind, if one gets affected, all of them are affected. And she answered. She tried her best to answer many times. She flubbed the two questions multiple times, and ended up like each time that she failed to answer, she ended up kind of like reverting to earlier and earlier memories of herself, until she dug all the way down to when she was still just one person, just one single clone, a prototype clone, being like educated by Goethe and the company who created her. And then she realized that she didn't have a real answer to Pareidolia, to who she was and why she was there. That not because she didn't know how to express it, or because she didn't understand the question, but because she genuinely did not exist as her own individual. She looked deep within herself and found that most of her, well, practically all of the things that made her deep down had not been life experiences, had not been like ethical choices. They had been programmed from the outside to make her more agreeable, to make her a better worker, to make her sort of more driven, more convenient, to be kind of a product. And even though she had gained her like a legal citizenship and independence from the company that created her, those things that had been ingrained deep into her soul remained and kept being repeated when she got cloned every time. So she found out at the worst possible moment that she didn't really have a core of subjectivity. She had a bunch of prime directives that had been given to her by somebody else, by Dr. Carla Maria Krosik, her creator. And in the end, she couldn't answer. And she got subsumed by Pareidolia. And just what's important to know is that the mice themselves, outside of Borealia, they didn't die. However, they lost the hive mind. The hive mind itself got wiped out. And all of these like little girls in the galaxy suddenly found themselves no longer being part of a hive mind, but normal humans, kind of. Lost in the galaxy with no idea what to do because their language, their society, their everything depended on the hive mind existing.
With bodies that they generate extremely quickly.
Yes. Yes. They didn't care that they didn't live past 15 because they say, okay, we're gonna like reincarnate again with all the knowledge in the hive mind. We'll just have to clone each other endlessly. When the hive mind was lost, then they suddenly became like confronted with their own mortality, and they became really desperate. But they got kind of saved by this massive, also like almost galactic spanning effort to reprocess them into like actual humans. An effort that is still ongoing, but at least he saved millions upon millions of them from just dying.
Yeah. Now they all get to grow up.
Yeah. They're gonna become adults, and as a subspecies, the Mai no longer exist. It's just become regular humans.
Yeah, it's important to explain that, you know, if you fail pareidolia, if you display yourself as an object. You know, who are you? Well, I am what's been constructed around me. You know, I am a general. Well, who are you? You're a general for someone else. You're a general for something else. You're a made-up constructed term. You know, who are you? Well, I am my drive. I am my will to do this or that. Yeah, that's you. That's you being a subject. You are doing something because of a primal drive or because of your true, you know, wish or will. Yeah. But if you are trying to give yourself a generic name or something that was given to you or bestowed upon you, you fail. And
Which is why you couldn't answer with your name.
Yes.
Because your name isn't you. Your name is a social construct that was given to you for convenience. And you couldn't answer with your nationality either, because that also isn't you. You couldn't answer with any of these social relational things or institutional things that were given to you by others. You had to answer by what you truly were underneath it all.
Also,
yes.
If you, even if you quote chose your name, that wouldn't be a valid answer, because what your name is it's a placeholder term for the image of you that others perceive. Like even if I said, oh, I'm G2, that's a constructed name. That's not actually who I am.
The logic behind it was that Lycos himself said he saw these two coronas fighting over food. He said, okay, the only there has to be a higher authority that they are all deferring to in order to take decisions, because or else we live in an anarchy. I will make myself that higher authority. I will lay claim over all institutional authority in all Borealia. So either you answer by saying that you answer to my authority, in which case you become a Death Knight. You answer. You say that you answer to another institutional authority, in which case you're not really a person. You're just you were just sent here. You're a machine doing an errand for something else. And since here I am the lord of the land, your authority is not valid. Therefore, you get absented. Or you answer with something that depends on neither me nor some external institution. You answer with who you truly are, be it your experiences, your pain, your emotion, your creation, your insanity, perhaps, your whole life experience as one single thing in and of itself. That is not institutional. Like, nobody gave you that. Nobody declared that you. In the case of Ruth, nobody declared that she had to lose her child. That is something very traumatic that happened to her, and it shaped her identity outside of any social institutional rules. Therefore, also outside of everything that Lycos was laying claim to. Hence, Ruth, by this horribly painful thing that she went through with her in her past, was able to sidestep the question, say, I am my loss, and stab Lycos in the eye.
And that's how pareidolia worked. Alright, any other questions at all? Blimey, we're coming up on 2 hours. To be fair, I expected that. Alright. It doesn't seem like there's any more questions. So,
what's in the future?
Nothing. There is no future.
Okay.
Can we blow it up again?
Yeah, in 7 years when we get round to doing it again.
Enough to convince
Yeah.
Ancerious ends.
Fantastic. Anyway, thank you all for attending, and I will catch you for the next discussion.